Mwah! Hello, kings, queens, in-betweens, and ooh, whee, I love me an in-between. My name is Zoe, and I go by a different kind of queen here on YouTube. Okay, so a question came across in my Flow app yesterday, and the question was, friends with benefits, are you going or nah? So, like I said, I'm gonna tell you all my tea in honesty and transparency for the glory of the Lord. So I'm gonna tell you how my college friends with benefits thing got started and what I learned along the way. Now this one's gonna be a series, y'all. So I'm gonna tell you how it got started. Alrighty, babies, it's time for the BVOV Bible verse of the video, and full disclosure, this one stings a little bit. Alright, here it is. Proverbs chapter 5 verses 3 through 6. The lips of a mysterious woman drip honey, and her tongue is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps lead to the grave. She doesn't stay on the way of life. Her paths wander, but she doesn't know it. All right, y'all. So, very first up front, I'm going to tell y'all, one, this is going to be a series, and two, this is going to be an honest, open, and transparent series, honey, okay? I am not keeping anything to myself. Why? Because everything that happened goes along on my journey and is one of the reasons that I am who I am now in God. And two, because in church, they keep too much stuff to themselves. And sometimes the exact thing that's messing with you is what is the exact thing they left out because they wasn't ready to talk about it themselves. So I'm going to tell y'all the whole tea and nothing but the tea. And you gonna hear it. All right. So, okay. So, story time. This is where it starts. I was in a relationship in college, a pretty serious relationship. Definitely, had plans for marriage in this relationship. And it started my freshman year. The thing about this relationship is that it was it was toxic. And so we were that couple in college that kept breaking up and getting back together and breaking up and getting back together for various reasons, okay? So me and my college spug, who is named JR for the purposes of this story time, JR, got started on one of the very first breaks that me and this individual had, okay? Because that was kind of our thing throughout the entire course of this, I don't even know what to call it, because it was like, I would traditionally call it a relationship, and that's one of the issues with friends with benefits, y'all. It feels like a relationship, and it is a relationship, but without any of the benefits of a usual relationship. Does that make sense? So I can't call you mine because you're not mine, but you mine, almost. But nigga, you mine. That's what I meant to say. I said I was gonna be honest. But nigga, like, you're acting like mine, I'm acting like yours, but we have no claims to each other. Like, that's one of the confusing parts. Whatever. So it was me and JR got together for the very first time on one of the breaks that me and Don Julia, my spouse in college, or like my girlfriend, my first love girlfriend in college, had. So this is the story of how me and JR got started. And all of this happened in the midst of a break that me and Don Julia were on. I'm trying to remember these names that me and Don Julia were on. So me and Don Julia had broken up. Don't remember the reason. There were too many. So me and Don Julia had broken up. And unfortunately, me reeling from heartbreak, because I was truly in love with this girl. Me reeling from heartbreak, I actually had a one-night stand with some nameless individual. I'll tell you the story. If you want to hear it, drop it in the comments, let me know. But it was like not one of my best moments, to be quite honest. It was just meaningless, absolutely nothing, right? And this was the day after that had happened. So basically, one of the things is I was feeling this heartbreak, and so I was looking for something to fill that void. And for me, another relationship felt like the right thing for that void. So who was up here and presented to me available? JR. Now, pause. When I say presented to me available, there was this girl. Her name is Haley for the purposes of this video. Haley was always in me and Don Julia's relationship. I'm telling you, this story goes over the course of a couple, of years. She was always right there every time we had a problem. If you've ever been in a relationship, sometimes in unhealthy ones, or even just in relationships, period, somehow when you are always having arguments and one person is at the center of all those arguments, or is around those arguments, or is initiating those arguments, or always just so happens to have been there when something that produced an argument happens, honey, pay attention, okay? You ain't crazy. And basically that was my issue with Haley. Haley was always just in our business in a sketchy kind of way. So full transparency, I did not like Haley. I was trying every day. I was like, God would not have me to be at odds with this other person who was a part of my church community, who, it's a small church. I was really trying, but there was just always something off and manipulative about her vibe, right? Now, this is why I mentioned Haley. Haley was interested in JR. JR is who was to become my spud. So Haley was always interested in JR. Was interested in JR from jump. And for some reason, she had it in her head that even though I was with Don Julia, that I wanted JR. Now, this was long before me and JR were anything but associates. I won't even say friends. This was from jump. We were nothing but associates. In fact, one of the reasons that me and JR got to know each other on a friend level before any of this got started was because Haley would always be trying to talk to Don Julia in private, and then it would just be me and JR sitting in the room by ourselves talking because I couldn't be in there because it was her business. You see, I'm a little salty still. But yeah, so we would just sit and talk and get to know one another while they were in the room having some private conversation. Whatever. That's basically how me and JR got to know each other for the very first time. Basically what happened, it was a few days after our break. And that was longer than that. It was maybe a month or two. I don't remember time. It was after our breakup, and JR was taking me, Haley, and my best friend Gabby. Gabby is a real name because that's my chick. That's my beach. JR, almost said his real name. JR was taking me, Haley, and Gabby to go get some food at Chipotle. Ubers were mad expensive there. So he would take us places, and he was taking us to Chipotle. Now, one thing about me, I used to work at Chipotle. So there's never going to be a day where I'm going to crave Chipotle. If we're going, I'll eat it, but am I going to be oh, you know what I could really go for today? Some Chipotle. That's never going to be Zoe. So basically, I was they wanted to go to Chipotle, and I was I'll ride. Yeah, sure, I'll go get something. And then by the time that we got there, I was nah. Actually, I'd rather eat in the calf than eat at Chipotle, to be honest. So Haley and Gabby went inside the restaurant, and so JR needed some gas. So I was I'll just ride with JR to the gas station. I really have no interest in standing in the Chipotle line. So me and JR went to the gas station, and during the gas station, that's where I got a little something came over me, and I was well, Haley always had suspicions that me and JR were together. Let me see what it do. You know what I mean? I'm not even gonna lie. I was I'm gonna drop a little bait and I'm gonna see what happens because I'm hurting. I need somebody to feel this hurt. And JR is right here and presented himself. Period. He was always that guy that was kind of flirtatious, and you could tell he was down for whatever, whenever. All you had to say was go. He was definitely that kind. So I was you know what? Might as well Like, let me just see what it do, right? So basically I rode with JR to the gas station, and while at the gas station, so JR had this beard, and it was a nice beard. I'm not even gonna cap. It was like, it was connecting, it was full grown. And basically in the midst of this first breakup, one thing that I also did, which I am not proud of, is I had a one-night stand. And I had just had the one-night stand with this guy, and he also had a beard. So when JR gets into the car while the gas is pumping, I was like, hey, JR, like, just a question, like, do guys with beards like having their necks kissed? And he was like, huh? Like, it was all like interest peaked, right? And I was like, yeah, like, there was this guy, and I was talking to him, and we were in this situation, and I just didn't know if I should go or if I should stop, right? From there, the conversation got a little spicy. He was like, well, like, yeah, sometimes it just kind of depends on the guy, who's this guy, that kind of thing, right? So the gas gets done pumping, but we're in the midst of this conversation. I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, but it was spicy. We were talking about, like, sex and relationships, and like those, like, maybe even like sexual maneuvers, or like make out maneuvers, things like that. And the conversation was getting like spicy. It was getting good. So basically what happened was we drove back to Chipotle, but instead of pulling into the Chipotle parking lot, we pulled into the parking lot of, it was some like Home Depot or Menards or Lowe's, something like that, that was basically adjacent to the parking lot of Chipotle. So we could see through to Chipotle to the door, so we knew when they would come out, but they couldn't see us because we were in an adjacent parking lot. And who would think to look in that direction when we're supposed to be pulling into the Chipotle parking lot, right? So we sat there and we were talking for probably like 15 minutes and I'm not saying 15 minutes, I'm saying 15 minutes after we saw Haley and Gabby standing outside of the Chipotle with their food. Like, I'm not even gonna lie, it was type trifling because it was hot. It ain't right to leave nobody in New Orleans heat like that for no reason. And that's what we did. I'm not even gonna cap. Sorry, y'all. But yeah, so after a while, basically, he was like, we ain't going back, so you say we going back. You know what I mean? And I was like, nah. I was like, we should go back. I feel bad that me and Haley, we ain't cool. But like I said, you shouldn't leave nobody in the New Orleans heat like that. And Gabby, that's my beach. That's my best friend. So we got to go back, right? So we go back, and basically he drops us back off at our dorms, and we go in. Later on that evening, maybe about an hour later, I realized I left my donuts in the car. Because while I was not eating at Chipotle, I did get some donuts at some point during this trip. So I was like, oh, dang, I left my donuts in the car. And being a broke college student, I'm not even gonna cap, I wanted my donuts to get back to me. Yeah, it's hungry. It's a little bit greedy, but I'm telling the truth, okay? So I messaged JR and I was like, hey, I left my donuts in the car. Can you just bring them to me when you pick us up for church on Sunday? Made sense to me, a little breakfast in the car before church and be fine, right? But after that conversation we had, and it was like, he was like, well, I could just bring them right now. And I was like, what? You don't gotta drive all the way now just to bring me some donuts. And he was like, nah, I'm coming. So then he pulls up, he brings the donuts, and I get back into the car. In the car, we pull up to, he ends up parking because we start to have another conversation. That's one thing I will say about me and JR is, even though we were definitely lusting and living in sin, we definitely had a connection. I will say that. And that's another lesson. Sometimes God, like, I'm not gonna say God, but sometimes you will have good energy and connections with people that aren't supposed to be, like, they're still not your person. You feel that? So basically we had good vibes. So we were just chatting again. And this time we were still talking about, like, it definitely still had a sexual air, because you can't unring that bell, right? So it definitely still had a sexual air, but we were talking about philosophy. We were talking about music. I was talking about, like, I remember specifically I was talking about my favorite teacher and how, he really awoke in my mind. And at this time, I was also in women's studies. So I was talking about, sex and sexuality and the different ways that sexuality presents itself, and how I, at the time, recognized that I was definitely more of a sapiosexual or a demisexual than I was heterosexual. And one thing about sapiosexuals is that they experience physical attraction in the midst of like intellect. I may not have said that exactly right, but that's like a rough cut gist of it, right? So as we're having these conversations and talking about philosophies, the sapiosexual in me is on. Okay, baby, she is on. And like I said, I'm gonna be transparent. Red alert. Here's the time to turn it down. Baby, the fluids were moving, okay? She was ready to go. She being she was ready to go, okay? Like, I was hot and things like that. And I still, like, that's one thing. You can be feeling like physical attraction and like your body can be revved up and like ready for sex, but you not act on it. So like, it's difficult, but you can. So my body was feeling things, fluids was moving. I was like, and I told him, I was like, yeah, like, sapiosexual. I was like, we're having this conversation. We're talking about philosophy. We're talking about sexuality and all these different things. I was like, it's moving right now. Like, I'm hot. Like, you know, I'm feeling it. He was like, nah, Cap, like, you ain't, like, that's not even a thing. And I was like, it really is. Want to feel? That's what I said. But then I was like, oh, but you got to go in and out. Because this is not finna be that. We ain't finna have sex here in this car like this, right? And it, like, let me say this. I was like, you want to go in and out? And what did he do? He went in my cooter. I don't know what to call it on here. But basically he put his fingers in, and I was like, yo, like, and I was like, you got to pull them out. And your girl was splooshing. Okay, I was splooshing. So his eyes got so big, y'all. He was like, I mean, I could go back in. That's what JR said. He said I could go back in. I was like, nah. I was like, and part of me was like, Negro, like, and mind you, I will admit that I think that I have kind of an obscure view of sex, in that things that are radical to some are Tuesdays to me. Like, they're not that big of a deal. So I was like, Negro, what you talking about? It was for educational purposes, so purely. Like, this is not what that is, right? So he pulled his hand out, and I told him that, and there were no napkins in the car. So I cleaned his hand off with my mouth. Again, I think I have a skewed view of what sex is and what's radical in sex, because again, to me, while I thought that was flirtatious, I didn't know that it was like, I don't know how to say it without sounding crazy. I knew that it was like a little flirty, a little risque, you know, like maybe like giving somebody, I don't know what the equivalent would be in like normal terms. Maybe like giving him a kiss on the neck instead of a kiss on the cheek, but nah, he was like, oh, okay, so where are we parking? You know, like that kind of thing, right? And I was like, no. And I was like, JR, I'm gonna say his name again. I was like, JR, for real, like, we have this connection and I'm feeling you. And at that time, I was definitely the kind of person who was like, I believed in sex for sex sake. I thought that sex was natural. I still do think it is a beautiful spiritual experience. The box in which I think that experience should take place in is different now. But that was where like my original views of sex as a beautiful spiritual manifestation of just good, positive, beautiful energy started. So I was like, yeah, I'm definitely into, you know, a friends with benefits situation, but I was like, not with you, because Haley is into you. And I'm trying to work on a relationship with Haley because that is Don Julia's friend. You know, at that time, I was still trying to mend the relationship because I was like, okay, me and Don Julia aren't even together anymore. Maybe me and Haley can have some kind of friendship. And I was like, and more than anything, I was like, this girl, Haley, she lives on my floor in my dorm. She doesn't just live in like a sister dorm. She lives in my dorm, on my floor. We cannot be a thing until you and her have played out whatever it is.
that y'all are gonna play out, right? So yeah, hand was out, hand was cleaned, and I was like, after I told him, like, it's never gonna be a thing while you and Haley are a thing, like, that's just not gonna work for me. In my head, that was a moral high ground. And I mean, maybe it was some sort of, but in my head, I was like, yeah, that's the line that's too far to cross. Yeah, his hand was already inside me, but that's the line right there. But like, yeah, so after that, I was like, hey, I'm gonna go back in the dorm. I got out the car, grabbed my donuts. Don't make the same mistake twice, people. And I went inside the building, and boom, it was it. Now, at this point was probably mid-year, probably like middle of the semester kind of time. And so after this, I think me and Don Julia got back together maybe a month later, a few weeks later. Lesbian relationships move very quickly. So it was like maybe a few weeks later, we had gotten back together. And then, so by the end of the school year, for some reason, we were broken up again, right?